Televizija PN.
Night after night, television brought images of death and suffering from the war that engulfed Yugoslavia between 1991 and 1995. When the fighting stopped, NATO countries, particularly the United States, eagerly claimed credit for ending the war. The lesson learned, many said, was that there should be early intervention in ethnic conflicts, and preferably by NATO. But did the West prematurely take credit for ending a war it had helped create? Did misguided Western intervention actually transform a small brush fire in the Balkans into a major civil war?
I think that what the international community on the whole, the Europeans and the Americans and the United Nations have done, on the whole, made it sure there was going to be a conflict.
The intelligence community was unanimous in saying that if we go ahead and recognize Bosnia, it will blow up.
Because there was no agreed branches and because everybody was armed, if you ruptured the old Yugoslavia by unilaterally declaring independence, in fact, seceding was a war of secession. Once you decided to secede, you had no hope that it could be done peacefully.
Early 1990 had brought a brief moment of hope and optimism to Europe as the Berlin Wall crumbled and the Cold War ground to a halt. A newly united Germany stood poised to unite the rest of Europe through its leadership of the European Community, a friendly but powerful rival to the United States. But the promise of European unity was short-lived. Just 2 years later, much of Yugoslavia was in flames. A small war in the Slovenian Republic led to larger, more bloody conflicts in Croatia and Bosnia-Herzegovina. Moreover, European nations, the United States, and Middle Eastern states were backing different factions in these outbreaks of civil war. Publicly, Western diplomats blamed irresponsible ethnic leaders of the different Yugoslav republics for the bloodshed, including Milan Kucan of Slovenia, Franjo Tudjman of Croatia, and especially Slobodan Milosevic of Serbia. There was certainly no innocence among the warring parties. Privately, however, European Community envoy Lord Carrington and UN mediator Cyrus Vance were furious at Germany's foreign minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher. Vance would later call the conflict Mr. Genscher's War because of Germany's push to recognize separatists in Slovenia and Croatia.
Vance argued that recognition would take away the diplomatic leverage that he had to try to bring the conflict in Croatia to an end and could possibly result in Bosnia blowing up.
The former German foreign minister claimed that his government did not support the breakup of Yugoslavia until fighting began.
We held a strong position for the unity of Yugoslavia, as I said, but we saw that the will to keep it together vanished more and more under the pressure of military events.
In fact, however, since the 1960s, Germany's intelligence arm, the BND, was deeply involved in the training of Croatian separatists, led by the pro-Nazi Ustashi who fled to Germany after World War II, and participated in a number of terrorist actions against embassies and the government of Yugoslav communist leader Josip Broz Tito.
In the early 60s, the BND decided to cooperate fully with the Ustasha. This became plain to see after the so-called Croat Spring in the beginning of the 70s. After Tito's death, they accelerated their efforts, together with the Ustasha, in order to disintegrate Yugoslavia into several smaller states.
Germany's crucial role in supporting Croatian separatists is confirmed by Anton Duhacek, the former director of Yugoslav counterintelligence, who was himself a Croat.
The Germans wanted an absolute and complete subordination of Croatian intelligence that would carry out all that the Germans wanted. And the Germans promised that this would be in the interest of the future independent, free Croatia.
On the surface, Yugoslavia seemed better off than its East European neighbors in the 1970s and 80s. The U.S. considered its independent communist leader, Josip Broz Tito, an asset in the Cold War with Moscow. Yugoslavia's economy was propped up with Western loans even after Tito's death in 1980. The carefully staged 1984 Olympics in Sarajevo offered the world the impression of a peaceful, multi-ethnic country working together. Veteran observers, however, could see trouble below the surface.
I think the first hint I got of a violent breakup was when I made a tour of all of the republics in 1983, and I heard a lot of sort of separatist sentiments in several of the republics, especially Slovenia and Croatia, but not only. And some very threatening remarks were made in the course of my conversations about what we would do to them and so on.
By themselves, neither Slovenia nor Croatia had the diplomatic or military power to actually separate, to challenge Yugoslavia's federal army, which was the fourth largest in Europe. But Germany provided not only diplomatic support, but also weapons, even after an international arms embargo.
And I wrote a story about it, which was called "The Blockade's a Joke." And so I went and started checking the ports, like Split and the ports along the Dalmatian coast, and as best I could, checking the stuff that was coming across the borders, and there was no limitations.
We saw a Croatian MiG-21 shot down in the Krajina, which the Croatians said came from former Yugoslav Air Force stocks. In fact, it was clearly from East German Air Force stocks. It had the East German radar warning receivers on board. So we know that these weapons are coming from the former East German stocks, so that they're, if you like, slightly disguised in the sense that they don't look like West German weapons, but they are coming from West Germany, obviously with the West German government's blessing. There can be no other way in which heavy weapons can be supplied like this.
While separatist forces were being armed, Germany was, at the same time, warning the Yugoslav government of Ante Marković not to use force against separatists. Ante Marković, who was himself a Croatian, presided over a divided government which was unable to stand up to German pressure or rally his government for the challenges ahead.
He never lined up, coalition support. He always flew solo. So, he could be welcomed in the White House, and was, but he didn't have any backing at home. So in that sense, he was a real failure, and a disastrous one in that he preserved the fiction that Yugoslavia was holding together.
The Yugoslav Federal Army, which held the country together, now became a target for those who wanted to break it apart. At a Croatian separatist rally in Split in May of 1991, demonstrators strangled a young soldier of the Federal Army and then tossed his dead body onto the street. This and similar events seem to bear out predictions by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency.
The CIA said in 1990, October, that Yugoslavia faced breakup, probably violent, as early as 6 months from the time of the report. And nobody paid any attention to it in the higher echelons of government.
By June of 1991, however, U.S. Secretary of State James Baker decided to make one attempt to prevent a disaster. He flew to Belgrade, the capital of Yugoslavia, to confront leaders of the 6 republics.
He said, don't any of you take steps that are not agreed on by the others.
However, Milan Kucan and Franjo Tudjman, leaders of the Slovenian and Croatian republics, were confident that they could ignore the U.S. Secretary of State. They declared their independence just days later, on June 25th, because they could count on the support of German Foreign Minister Genscher and Austrian Foreign Minister Alois Mock. The cycle of violence which would destroy Yugoslavia began when Slovene President Milan Kučan ordered his troops to seize customs posts on the Yugoslav borders with Austria and Italy and the Slovene capital of Ljubljana. Yugoslav flags were taken down and replaced with Slovenian flags.
And the Slovenes thought they had a right to take down those flags. The end of an internationally recognized frontier. And I don't think that for a moment Belgrade expected